Okay, we are good to go, right? That was a very informal introduction to the beginning of the service. Is my audio working?
Yes.
Thank you. All right, it is 10:33, so here we go.
I'm not sure this looks different. I'm going.
Who's looking different? Okay. Good morning, everyone. I guess you know who I am, Dixie Morrow, coordinator for this service, although so far it's been kind of uncoordinated. This morning, we, as usual, welcome everybody into the sanctuary with the ringing of bells. And this morning, we're also welcoming Reverend Alex Holt, who's the part-time contract minister at Meadville. He's in our virtual pulpit today. So please, everyone, remember that you can unmute yourselves, but the host and co-host can't unmute you if you have muted yourself. So you need to be muting and unmuting, or rather unmuting yourselves when we need to ring the bell. So if you have a bell, here we are. You can unmute and enjoy the sound. Oh, very good, very effective welcome. Janet, you can mute everybody again. And this morning, Bryan Head is going to sing our welcome song. And I haven't seen Bryan here yet.
I can't hear everybody.
Slow, talk low.
Whoever you are, we welcome you. Wherever you come from, we welcome you. Whomever you love, we welcome you. Whoever you are, we welcome you. Wherever you come from, we welcome you. Whomever you love, we welcome you. Whomever you love, we welcome you. Whomever you love, we welcome you.
And now we have Nanci, yes, myself reading the opening words. We have been in a kerfuffle this morning, so I'm getting used to a new computer, and so I'm splitting between shuffling papers and looking at a split screen. But to try and enter a more sacred tone, and this is introductory for Reverend Alex's message today. The opening words are from Karen Armstrong, The Case for God. A God who kept tinkering with the universe was absurd. A God who interfered with human freedom and creativity was a tyrant. An omnipotent, all-knowing tyrant is not so different from earthly dictators who make everything and everybody mere cogs in the machine which they control. An atheism that rejects such a God is amply justified. We'll now have the prelude played by Jackson Froman, followed by the chalice lighting read by Nanci Reed.
The chalice lighting words are by Eric Walker Windstrom. When we focus our light, when we light our chalice, everyone focuses on the flame. Yet it is the paraffin of the candle, the wick of the cotton of the wick, the potassium chlorate and sulfur of the match, and the oxygen in the air around us that makes that flame possible. As leaders, we are not called to be a lone beacon on a hill. Rather, we are meant to work together so that we might together shine. If possible, please hold up your chalice as you light them. Emma, Lulu, and Tella will lead us in the children's bond.
Clyde, if you can bring up the screen share so we can see the bond of union. And that will be led by Michelle Page. If you want to go back, there we go. And we will all remain muted, but let's all recite it together from each in our own individual rooms. All right, Michelle.
We unite ourselves together for the study and practice of morality and religion as interpreted by the growing thought and noblest lives of humanity, believing that we may thereby prove helpful one to another and promote the cause of truth, righteousness, and love in the world.
All right, and the next slide.
Are you unmuted? Yeah.
Now we have Reverend Holt will share the opening words.
Actually, the reading.
Or reading, sorry.
That's fine. Well, good morning, everyone. Nice to see you again on this rather beautiful day, at least down here in Meadville, hopefully up there too. Let me say a few words about Karen Armstrong before I do the reading. She is a world-renowned religious historian. She used to be a Catholic nun, and she got into deep trouble because she asked too many questions that the Mother Superior did not like. And she eventually left the convent and became a religious historian, well known around the world. I heard her speak at General Assembly about 6 years ago or so. And this particular book that I'm quoting today from, The Case for God, basically turns the concept upside down and inside out. And so we might resonate with it a bit. So it's a fairly long reading, and there'll be a short silence. She says, all faith systems have been at pains to show that the ultimate cannot be adequately expressed because it lies beyond words and concepts. But many people today are no longer comfortable with this reticence. They feel they know exactly what they mean by God. The catechism definition I learned at the age of 8, God is the supreme spirit who alone exists of himself and is infinite in all perfections, was not only dry, abstract, and rather boring, it was also incorrect. I was not taught to take the next step and see that God is not a spirit, that he has no gender, and that we have no idea what we mean when we say that a being exists. The result is that many of us have been left stranded with an incoherent concept of God. We often learn about God about the same time as we are learning about Santa Claus. But our ideas of Santa Claus change, mature, and become more nuanced, whereas our ideas of God can remain at a rather childish level. So I'd invite us to take a few moments of silence and just reflect on what Karen Armstrong was trying to tell us. And could it be true? Well, first of all, thanks for letting me come back, at least virtually. Thanks to Dixie. And I had a really good conversation this week with a couple of you regarding the possibility of live streaming down here in Meadville. So I really appreciate the efforts, Kelly and Dixie and others. So I'm curious, has anyone here ever been to Glacier National Park?
You?
Some of you? Good. Beautiful place. I hope you agree.
Yes.
It's in the northern part of Montana. That's about 10 hours from Seattle and Portland. And when I lived in the Northwest, which has been quite a few years over time, I would be invited by the fellowship in Kalispell, which is down below Glacier, to come over and do a service every year. So it was several years ago, probably when I was still in Woodinville, Washington, about 2007. So they asked me to come over, so I drove over. And I came in on a Friday, and on Saturday morning, I decided to go out and get some coffee and a nourishing breakfast. Mind you, the word nourishing. So Whitefish, which is by Glacier, is a small town, and I was able to find a good coffee place and not very much in the way of food, but there were possibilities. So I found some coffee. Then I decided to treat myself. I got a triple chocolate muffin. This was a muffin that had chocolate chips, dark chocolate, and when you've opened it, there would be molten chocolate dripping down the inside. It smelled heavenly. And not only did they have the triple chocolate muffin, but they put gelato on top of it. And that was also chocolate. So you can see the trend here. And let me just say, it was heavenly. It was still warm, and the aroma was wonderful, and I totally had a great breakfast. Maybe not nourishing, but it was great. So a little bit later that morning, I decided to drive up the valley towards Glacier National Park. Unfortunately, it was fall and they had closed the park early due to snow. So on the way back, I decided to take a different road. And on the way to Whitefish, which is where I was staying, I saw a church on my right. And there was a sign on it. It was a kind of an older church, but fairly large. And there was a sign on the outside, and you just have to imagine a finger pointing towards me. And the sign said, "You sinner, get in here now." And I thought, you gotta be kidding me. It was only a triple chocolate muffin. Don't blame me for it. And then that was my first reaction. Then my second reaction was up yours, and I gave a different finger gesture to the sign on principle. Now, that response probably sums up my old relationship with God. As some of you know, I grew up on a farm in Maine. We didn't go to church. We weren't very religious. In fact, the land around me was my spirituality. So I didn't think much about the God idea until 1984. I went to church for the first time at a UU church. And I'd say over the first, say, 35 years of my life, my relationship with God was simple. You don't bug me, and I'll not pretend to believe in you. Later, when I became Buddhist, and more importantly, when I was part of Alcoholics Anonymous, as I am to this day, I kept thinking, well, I don't like the word God, so I'm going to ignore it. But in the 12 steps, if any of you are involved in that, know that the concept or the idea of God as you understand, well, they say him, I'll say God. God as you understand God. So that meant to me, all right, Alex, maybe I need to use my imagination. I started to read more about reincarnation because I'm Buddhist. I also studied fairly extensively the work of two, one was a former priest, and the other was a priest in the 1940s. Jesuit geologist and paleontologist Pierre Teilhard de Chardin, who was Catholic and quite radical and almost excommunicated by the Vatican. And then the other one was the ex-Catholic Matthew Fox, who in the 1970s and 80s had talked about creation spirituality. And he's now an Episcopal priest, having nearly been excommunicated. And they had been looking at a very much more holistic idea of what the word God might mean than traditional religions would usually have. But my reaction to that sign was probably one fairly common to Unitarian Universalists and others today. Because let's face it, we live in a sea of God language, signs, bumper stickers, and especially swear words. And many of our congregations tiptoe very uneasily around the name God, as well as the concept. So is that the best we can do? Do we just ignore the whole thing? Do we ignore the question of whether God exists or not and focus on our worldly concerns? Feeding the poor, helping the homeless, helping the world from its wounds. Just the whole concept of God in the Western religious traditions, just supernatural nonsense. Well, as a writer who is a religious historian as well, Dr. David Berenson, And he articulated this difficulty in an essay called A Systemic View of Spirituality. It's actually a rather boring essay, but he says two very interesting things. And we're right after that going to have a very short time of silence, and you can reflect on them. And I'll read them slowly. He asks, is it easy to dispense with God? People have certainly tried. Gregory Bateson talked about the sacred, the pattern which connects. Eastern religions speak of the self or the higher self or higher consciousness. But then he says, none of these alternative brings forth the awe and power and majesty that have been associated with the word God and the presence it can evoke. Then he goes on to say the healthy skepticism that many of us may have. He says, for many, however, the word God does not call forth love, peace, and joy, but rather conjures up images of a smug piousness, of a guilty hypocrisy, of a syrupy sweet tone of voice that may cover a vengeful intolerance, of unconvoluted dogma, and especially of boring sermons, which may coexist with frenzied declarations of blind faith in a God we may not know. So let's stop here for a minute and think about those two sets of words. Do they resonate with you? Does that cover your definition of God? Or maybe there are other ones. So maybe we can come off of the screen now. And maybe later in the breakout rooms, we can talk about which one of those definitions worked best for us. And they probably both do for some of us. But let's face it, as I said before, our whole lives have been in a society where the concept and identity of God is a given. But we, many of us, wrestle with the traditional idea of God. We become a minority who end up here in church, or we're unchurched and trying to figure it all out and resisting traditional notions. And that's basically the core of the opening words today of Karen Armstrong. Later in her book, she talks about God as being either bipolar or passive aggressive or both. And she says this does not help our evolution in our religious understandings of ourselves and the universe. So she says there are other ways to define God. So I'm going to toss out a few of those this morning. The first one is God as mythos, and that's M-Y-T-H-O-S with a capital M. It's a central theme in her book, The Case for God. And what she does is to say that the catechism of God as she was taught as a child, the Supreme Spirit who alone exists of himself and is infinite in all perfections, was simply a beginner's understanding of God and would not stand up to any thoughtful scrutiny. And her later words in the reading, which I've always liked very much, were that we discover God at about the same time as we learn about Santa Claus. But our understanding of Santa Claus becomes more nuanced and mature as we grow up into adulthood. But there along the way, somehow many of us get caught. The notion of God as Father, Father who would punish us if we were bad and love us if we said and did the right things. Armstrong then argues that the idea of God is inherently beyond what our brains and our minds and intellect can give us. But she says that the concept of God was never built upon rationality or logic. It was built on feeling and connection rather than rationality. So when she talks about mythos, she's talking about the idea of God as ritual, intuitive insight from the arts, expressions of love. Not so much rationality and intellect, but feeling. We enter a place where labels and names are inadequate. And mythos is not myth, in her words. It's not fable, it's not old stories. It is its own realm of intuition and wisdom and insight. So how could we relate to this? Well, one solution to the God problem would be to understand God as expressions of art or music or an intuitive feeling or ritual meaning. So when you light a chalice this morning or any Sunday or at your home, what does it tell you? What kind of feeling does it evoke? She would say, that's God. We see a beautiful sunset. That's God. We look at a baby's face smiling up at us. That's where God exists. We hold hands with someone who's dying. God is in our hands and is a feeling we share with that person. So in her terms, God is found in our increasing awareness of self and other, of reaching out beyond the shallowness that can be our egos. She says God becomes a blossoming of love and awareness rather than an entity with omnipotent power and a dysfunctional personality. And that concept of a mythos God, of an intuitive co-emerging deity, is far removed from her warning of a tyrannical and mean-spirited deity. So you may go, okay, so what? What has this got to do with us? Well, now I'm going to ask you to use your imaginations just for a bit, because we're Unitarian Universalists. We have the perfect ability to change the rules if we need to. And there's nothing that holds us back from changing the rules about the G word. And here I say God rather than growth. So let's use our imaginations for a moment. What if, as human beings, our essential task in life was to create God over millennia through the hard work of love? What if the words in the Gospel of Matthew were the most important words of Jesus? You shall love your neighbor as yourself. How could our love for ourselves and one another and the world itself help in an ongoing creation? And if you want a practical example, I'd suggest that the current focus on anti-racism, anti-oppression, and Black Lives Matter is all about finding a new way to be in love. How do we move beyond fear of other into genuinely caring for each other and holding each other equally rather than superior and inferior? How do we learn to move towards climate justice if we cannot love the earth and all beings in it? And I think those are some of the questions that we are trying to address, but the word God, I think, sometimes gets in our way. So I'm going to suggest here that we Unitarian Universalists can actually have a lot of concepts of God. And if somebody were able to walk up to us and say, well, sir, do you believe in God? You could go through your entire list of meanings and say, well, yes, I do. And then walk off because you wouldn't have to explain it. So one possibility would be the evolutionary, inclusive, and not based upon a child's idea of a deity. I've suggested for the last couple of years that maybe our definition of God would be our seventh principle, our respectfully interdependent web of all existence of which we are a part. Mind you, it doesn't say we have a big part or we have the only part, and it doesn't say some existence, it says all. Consider how it's written. We human beings are part of a web of existence that's connected and leaves nothing and no one out. All existence means past, present, and future are contained in that statement. All sentient beings are there. Let's go a step further in our imagination. If the seventh principle is a web of connection, is it our thoughts and words and deeds that either strengthen or weaken that web of relationship that spans the universe and our little place in it? Is it possible that the web becomes stronger with our work of love over time? And yes, can it be torn and weakened by our hatreds and our resentments and having a knee on someone's shoulder, neck until they die? Is it possible that we in our individual lives and as Unitarian Universalists are helping to create that web of relationship that is becoming more aware and is becoming what we might call God, and becoming so because of our love and caring? And by the way, there is a part 2 to this sermon some other time if you want to invite me back. But here's a hint of what I'm suggesting around the evolution and dynamic and thickening and strengthening of those threads of relationship in the seventh principle, our word for God. When I was down in Texas serving a church, I was driving along, and there are a lot of churches in Texas, by the way. I was driving along, there was another sign. And the sign said, "You are the children of God and you have sinned." Suppose if that sign said something different, that were more accurate words. You are the parents of God, so learn to love and become wise. You are the parents of God, so learn to love and become wise. Which version of God do you prefer? Which one puts the power of love into our hands where it belongs? Thank you.
Thank you, Reverend Alex. We'll now take in hymn 318, played by Pat Lorei.
Next is our meditation on joys and concerns. During the meditation music, we invite everyone to type a few words using the chat box. You don't need to have a specific joy or sorrow, Just type in a few words about how you're feeling. Please do not respond directly to any entry. We quietly bear witness to each other's feelings. Thank you, Jackson, and thank you everyone for sharing. If I can just say the theme of what people wrote today for joys and concerns, it seems like there's an overall theme of gratitude. Gratitude for sobriety, for family, for personal family, and also for our UU family. Gratitude for the beautiful day, and even someone expressed gratitude for what we can all learn in solitude. So thank you very much, everyone, for sharing.
So we have the next couple of elements of our service will be the closing words, followed by extinguishing the chalice, ringing the bells, and the postlude that Jackson will play. All right, so we can pause the screen sharing, Clyde, and we'll take in the closing words.
The closing words were written by Eric Williams. May you be filled with the blessings of this covenanted community. May you carry them with you as you depart from here. May you discover the places in the world where these blessings are needed. May you have the courage to share them. May there be an open place within you to receive the blessings of the people whom you will meet along the way.
And the extinguishing the chalices with Edie Schulte.
Thank you, Kelly. It is our work, shared with each other in covenant, that creates and sustains this beautiful community. We extinguish this chalice, but its light lives on in the directions we have chosen today. The light of this faith lives on in us together, in our hearts, minds, bodies, and spirits. Amen, and blessed be.
The last, as the last element, oh, time to ring our bells. So we'll let the ushers unmute all of us, and we'll close our service formally with ringing the bells, and following that, we'll be during the postlude. Please put that in the chat box, and hit *9 if you're on a telephone and you wish to speak an announcement. All right, everybody. And we can mute everybody and hear the postlude.
Oh, this is Bleeding Heart Blues by James P. Johnson.
I don't know to find it.
I'm going to do a different tune. It's so hard. I'm sorry, guys. I messed up on the prelude. I'm messing up on this. It is not easy. With my hands are so heavy on this thing. So let me do a different one. This one's it's the same artist. It's Carolina Shout by James P. Johnson. Let me just start. We'll give it one more chance here.
That was fabulous. Thank you, Jackson. I must say that perhaps your disorientation is due to the fact that it looks like you're in a different time zone. You're muted. We can't hear you.
I practice the classical stuff too, and it's so weird playing because what I'm used to doing is recording, and it's not like playing live. It's like trying to make a recording in one take. That's what it feels like. So I have to practice recording in one take, and I'll be better next week because I finally figured it out. And then yeah, I'm in New Zealand right now. It's about 1 o'clock in the morning, so just kidding.
So, well, thank you, Jackson. I think you can see in the chat box that we do really appreciate your music and love it. Christine, did you noticed a couple announcements pop up you want to share with folks?
Yeah. Yes. The announcements consist of thank yous to Reverend Alex, to Jackson, and to everyone who contributed, and also to let folks know that the service committee met and that July is going to focus on white privilege and the Black Lives Matter movement. And I think that was the main things that I saw in there.
Oh, I noticed, yes, there'll be a congregational meeting after the Zoom service. Yes, on June 28th. Clyde, if you can bring up the last screen so we can, thank everybody. Dixie, if you wanna, I will thank Dixie for all the work that she put into this service. And I'll let Dixie thank everybody else.
Okay, I thank you very much, Jackson, for that introduction to how to do digital music live versus recordings, and thank you, Christine, for doing the announcements and the joys and concerns. We're sorry Tom Schlodecker couldn't be here today, and we thank Pat Lorei for filling in on a moment's notice. Clyde Wolper, thank you for screen sharing. That is a complicated thing. And Janet Krack for hushing, and Nanci Lorei for letting us into the room and counting us and reporting to Joanne and Lee, the attendants and the guests. Next week, the coordinator will be Mary Desmond, and with the guest speaker, her friend Yvonne Caputo on Flying with Dad. And thank you, Kelly, for emceeing and directing and doing all of the technical coordination. Now, Kelly will send us all to chat rooms where we can talk about Reverend Alex's message, I hope.